I shall now give the floor to the delegation of Pakistan. I call His Excellency Ambassador Syed Haidar Shah to the podium. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, members of the court, it is an honor to appear before you on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The matter before you is the latest in a line of cases concerning Israel's relentless persecution of the Palestinian people, by which Israel seeks to frustrate their right to self-determination, the formation of a Palestinian state, and the right to return of Palestinian refugees. A stain on the fabric of international law, this process has been ongoing since the Nakba of 1947 and 48 and manifests itself today in Israel's indiscriminate assault on Gaza. Whilst in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, the rest of Palestine is taken from its rightful owners via illegal Israeli settlements backed by illegal Israeli force. The court has recently addressed in detail the illegal Israeli occupation of Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem in its occupied Palestinian territory advisory opinion. These proceedings are the logical outgrowth of the court's findings in that opinion. They concern Israel's obligations to permit international organizations and third states to provide services of benefit to the Palestinian people, and they concern UNRWA, the subsidiary organ of the UN General Assembly that is the backbone of all humanitarian response in Gaza. Israel, which has long sought UNRWA's demise, has decided that the agency must, in the words of the Israeli Prime Minister, pass from the world. But more fundamentally, Pakistan comes before you today to affirm the vital and enduring importance of international law. Resort to law, to this court, and to other mechanisms of dispute settlement reflects the imperatives of a global community based on law. Against that background, I will provide the court in the first place with a factual update on the situation in Gaza before turning to explain its competence to render an advisory opinion in this case and the appropriate scope of the opinion so rendered. I will then turn to several aspects of the position adopted by Israel and its supporters and explain why they cannot be correct as a matter of international law before concluding Pakistan's presentation. Mr. President, members of the court, I come to my first point. Pakistan has provided the court with a detailed account of the situation in Gaza, East Jerusalem and the West Bank up to 28 February 2025. In this part of my presentation, I draw to the court's attention several developments in Gaza since that time, although this summary is by no means exhaustive. First, and most obviously, on the night of 17 March 2025, Israel collapsed the fragile ceasefire then in place. It recommenced its assault on what remains of Gaza and its civilian population. 400 Palestinians, many of them women and children, were killed in the first wave of Israeli airstrikes, adding to the over 50,000 Palestinians killed in the past 18 months. The killing continues to this day. Second, Israel's breach of the ceasefire was preceded by the severing of all humanitarian aid to Gaza, enacted by Israel to obtain leverage for its preferred ceasefire arrangement. Currently, Gaza is under a weeks-long Israeli blockade, cut off from external assistance, and under threat of starvation. Israel's conduct disproves the assertion in its written statement that it is working tirelessly with international partners to allow and facilitate the continued passage of humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza. Third, Israel has continued to target humanitarian workers in Gaza. In a recent incident, early in the morning of 23rd March 2025, its soldiers attacked a Red Crescent convoy in Gaza, as well as a marked UNRWA vehicle. 15 aid workers were killed, some after they had identified themselves. Israeli soldiers consigned their bodies to a mass grave, then crushed and buried their vehicles nearby. When the incident was uncovered, Israeli authorities claimed that the convoy was behaving suspiciously, advancing without headlights or emergency signals under cover of darkness. Then, a smartphone recording of the attack, filmed by one of the executed paramedics, was recovered from the gravesite. In it, the convoy can be seen by the side of the road, clearly marked with emergency lights active. As the Israeli attack begins, the paramedic begins to pray. Knowing he is about to die, he asks for his mother's forgiveness. "This is the path I chose," he says, "to help people." What I have just told the court is the briefest window into Gaza today. The situation of the Palestinian people when Pakistan filed its written statement was already catastrophic. Since then, it has only deteriorated, becoming, in the words of a senior UN official, an endless cycle of blood, pain, and death. Mr. President, members of the court, I turn now to my second point concerning the court's competence to give an advisory opinion in this matter and the scope of that opinion. As to your competence, it is undoubted for the reasons given by Pakistan in its written statement, as well as for the reasons given by the court in the occupied Palestinian territory advisory opinion, which apply in this case mutatis mutandis. The General Assembly resolution requesting the advisory opinion was supported by an overwhelming majority of UN members, and a similar number of participants in these proceedings plainly consider that the court is competent to answer and would answer the General Assembly's and should answer the General Assembly's request. Any opposition to this obvious conclusion is faint indeed. As to the scope of the opinion, Pakistan takes note of statements made by just two of the participants in these proceedings that the opinion should be somehow limited in scope because the General Assembly has requested the court only to identify Israel's obligations, not to address adherence to any such obligations. Any suggestion that the court should avoid making factual findings is wrong. As the court has previously recognized, no advisory opinion is rendered in a vacuum, even if the question before the court is of a legal character. To opine without making necessary findings on the question's factual metrics risks, as the court has held, an answer that is potentially incomplete, ineffectual, and even misleading as to the pertinent legal rules actually governing the matter under consideration. Beyond this, the argument is based on an unjustifiably narrow reading of the General Assembly's resolution, which asks what are the obligations of Israel. It refers to obligations generally, and as Pakistan explained in its written statement, Israel's obligations include its secondary obligations under the law of state responsibility to seize any unlawful acts and make full reparation. It follows that the court must also opine on whether Israel has breached any primary obligations of international law to define the content of Israel's secondary obligations of secession and reparation, and so give a complete answer to the question posed. If the court disagrees with this analysis, then it should still not shy away from finding that Israel has breached primary rules of international law, as indeed it did in the occupied Palestinian territory advisory opinion, which the General Assembly has asked the court, by its present request, to supplement. An opinion that only states what Israel's obligations are and not whether they have been breached would be vulnerable to subversion. To advance matters, a complete advisory opinion from the UN's principal judicial organ is required. Therefore, to the extent necessary, the court should exercise its power to expand or reformulate the General Assembly's request to identify the true legal question under consideration. Mr. President, members of the court, I turn in the third part of my presentation to examine certain positions taken by Israel in its written statement and explain why they cannot be correct as a matter of fact and law. As the court is aware, Pakistan has submitted a detailed written statement in these proceedings, which it maintains in full. In my remarks today, I propose to focus on 3 points. First, I will examine Israel's claim that UNRWA has been, to use Israel's terminology, infiltrated by militant groups. Second, I will examine Israel's claims as to the scope of its obligations towards UNRWA pursuant to the Charter of the United Nations and the General Convention, being the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. Third, I will examine some of Israel's other claims as to the scope of its obligations under international humanitarian law. Starting with my first point, Israel's statement is characterized by a series of accusations concerning UNRWA's supposed infiltration by militants, which is said to justify the action taken against UNRWA by Israel, including under the so-called anti-UNRWA legislation that came into effect on 30th January 2025. These claims should be approached with great caution. Much of the evidence that Israel offers in defense of his claims takes the form of screen grabs from the website of the spokesperson of the Israeli Defense Forces. Far from being evidence capable of bearing any weight, these screen grabs should be treated as little more than bald assertions. The same may be said about the material that Israel has provided to establish its related claim that multiple UNRWA staff members participated in the events of 7 October 2023. When inspected, this also turns out to be an unverifiable series of screen grabs that are difficult to understand, let alone rely on. The overall paucity of Israel's account is corroborated by the investigation of UN's Office of Internal Oversight Services. Israel claims this investigation confirmed that UNRWA employees took an active role in the events of 7 October 2023. That is not the case. Of the 19 cases of alleged UNRWA staff participation, 10 were found to be without foundation or insufficiently evidenced, and 9 further cases needed to be investigated further and independently corroborated. In any event, the 9 individuals in question were dismissed from UNRWA service immediately. Another arresting claim in Israel's written statement is that 1462 UNRWA employees are militants or members of terrorist factions. Israel asserts this can be proved on the basis of lists of militants obtained by Israel in the course of the current hostilities in Gaza, with the list of 12,521 UNRWA employees in Gaza during the years 2023-24. But Israel has not provided any of these purported lists to the court, and it provides no definition of what it means by terrorist factions. The court can do nothing with such an accusation. These are just the most obvious examples of Israel's thin evidentiary case. These examples, and any others that Israel presents in support of its position, should be read against the background of Israel's proven propensity to dissemble if it serves its interests. I have already commented on the recent 23rd March 2025 killing of humanitarian workers by Israeli soldiers, as well as on Israel's fabrication of a confected narrative concerning that episode. That narrative is no isolated incident. Forensic analysis of Israel's previous legal submissions to this very court further demonstrates the serial unreliability of Israel's forensic case. All this is to say that Israel's claim that UNRWA has been infiltrated in any meaningful sense by militants is risible. And this in turn prompts the question of why Israel really wants UNRWA gone. An answer to that question is not difficult to find because its officials keep telling us what that answer is. Since the Nakba, UNRWA has preserved the Palestinian people and their peaceful traditions throughout the Levant and ensured that they do not perish from the earth. In 2018, Israel's Prime Minister said that the agency perpetuates the Palestinian refugee problem through the narrative of the right of return, and therefore needed to pass from the world. Jumping forward to 2025, the story is the same. The same Israeli Prime Minister complained that UNRWA is self-perpetuating in its desire to keep alive the Palestinian refugee issue. Its Foreign Minister described the agency as part of the Palestinian lie that there are refugees who need to return to the state of Israel. And its ambassador to the UN declared that UNRWA's goal is to produce millions of Palestinian refugees who believe in the non-existent right of return. Once this is understood, the pretextual character of Israel's claim is clear. It sees in this crisis an opportunity to rid itself of UNRWA once and for all. It thinks that in the clamor of its attack on Gaza, the removal of the agency will become a forgotten line item on a long list of outrages. The General Assembly, by its request for an advisory opinion, has asked this court to ensure that this does not occur. I move now to my second point concerning Israel's purported justification for its abuse of UNRWA. Before I do so, it is worth noting what Israel does not contest. It does not contest that, as UNRWA is a subsidiary organ of the General Assembly, Israel is obliged to apply the General Convention to UNRWA. It does not contest that Article 2, Section 3 of that convention renders UNRWA premises inviolable. And it does not contest that the protection of that provision is maintained in times of armed conflict. On this basis, Israel must also be taken not to contest that its persistent targeting of UNRWA officials in Gaza is illegal. Pakistan has listed many such incidents in its written statement. Each and every one of these incidents is unlawful, and each and every one of them erodes the protection that the UN and its staff have a right to expect in conflict areas the world over. Turning now to what Israel does actually say, it seeks to justify its conduct entirely on the basis of UNRWA's purported entanglement with militants. But as we have already seen, that entanglement is a fiction. As a forensic matter, Israel's position collapses from the outset. I could stop there, but Israel's position is also shot through with legal errors. Some of the more significant mistakes are as follows. First, Israel observed that it is obliged under Article 2, Paragraph 5 of the Charter to give the UN every assistance in any actions it takes in accordance with the present Charter. It then claims that where UN action is manifestly contrary to the Charter, then Israel is not obliged to cooperate. This does not advance Israel's case. Israel has entirely failed to present any evidence that the UN or any of its subsidiary or affiliated entities is so acting. And such claims, in any event, could not apply to any humanitarian activity. Second, Israel claims, with support from only one other state, that its obligation of assistance under Article 2, Paragraph 5 of the Charter is limited to Security Council action taken under Chapter 7. But Paragraph 5 does not say this. The first clause of the paragraph is clear that the obligation of assistance is unlimited, a reading confirmed by this court in the Reparation for Injuries Advisory Opinion. And it is confirmed by the UN Secretary General's written statement in these proceedings, which confirms the unqualified duty of cooperation in paragraph 5 and why that duty is essential to the operations of the UN. The only material against this identified by one participant yesterday is an isolated section of the Tabor. This thin and supplementary material does not even begin to displace the plain meaning of the provision. Third, Israel claims that Article 105 of the Charter does not confer upon the UN or its officials a right of unfettered access to or through a member's territory, or any right to operate therein without a member's consent. This statement could have currency if UNRWA operated in Israel, but it does not. Israel does not possess sovereignty over areas in which the agency operates, nor does it presently claim it, with the exception of East Jerusalem, which this court held to be illegally occupied by Israel. As such, Israel can claim no sovereign rights in the relevant areas, including rights of exclusion. Simply put, UNRWA has a right to operate in East Jerusalem, as well as Gaza and the wider West Bank, which has been affirmed by the Palestinian people. Israel has no such right. Fourth, Israel errs in framing the action taken by Israel against UNRWA as a simple withdrawal of consent for the agency to operate in East Jerusalem. This is misguided. The legislation is far more than that. Laws do not simply sit dormant on the statute books. They are enforced through the power of the state. In this case, that means Israel removing UNRWA from East Jerusalem in violation of the agency's inviolability under Article 2, Section 3 of the General Convention. It means crippling UNRWA's ability to carry out its mission in Gaza and West Bank in violation of Article 2, Paragraph 5 of the Charter. It means disregard for the international character of the agency in violation of Article 100, Paragraph 2 of the Charter. And it means breach of the 14 June 1967 exchange of letters that regulated relations between Israel and the agency until Israel purported to terminate it on 3 November 2024. Even if that exchange of letters is gone, its protections are replicated as essential to UNRWA's mission by Article 105, Paragraph 1 of the Charter, a functional provision that guarantees all immunities and privileges which are necessary for the fulfillment of UNRWA's purposes. Israel therefore remains obliged to ensure the protection and security of the personnel, installations, and property of UNRWA. It remains obliged to permit the free movement of UNRWA vehicles within East Jerusalem and into and out of Gaza and the West Bank. And it remains obliged to allow the agency's international and local staff to move freely within the same areas. All these privileges and immunities and others have been violated by Israel's decision to put its so-called anti-UNRWA legislation into effect. The court should be under no illusions. Israel's conduct towards UNRWA reflects one of the most significant breaches of the privileges and immunities of an international organization in the history of the UN. If Israel is not censured, that conduct will become an invitation and a blueprint for governments around the world to use the power of the state to remove international scrutiny. Israel's behavior is therefore a threat to the UN operations globally and should be treated as such by the court. My third and final point considers Israel's obligations under international humanitarian law. Its arguments start from a false premise that the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza are subject to separate legal regimes, including on an assertion that Israel is not the occupying power in Gaza. This is wrong. In the Occupied Palestinian Territory Advisory Opinion, this court determined that Israel remains in constructive occupation of Gaza. In any event, Israel's control of Gaza today could not be more evident. It empties cities. It cuts off aid. It controls every point of entry and exit. And its officials have committed to continue seizing large parts of that territory. With respect to the West Bank, Israel claims its sovereignty is in abeyance and that it applies the 1907 Hague regulations and the humanitarian provisions of the Fourth Geneva Convention as a matter of policy. It claims Jerusalem as sovereign Israeli territory, which is subject to Israeli law. Again, this court need not be reminded of its rulings on Israel's illegal occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Israel's attendant obligations. The balance of Israel's arguments center on Israel's articulation of its own purported rights and authority, arguing that the law of occupation does not entail any direct obligations towards third parties or any rights thereof. This is a radical but flawed submission. Indeed, Israel itself does not maintain it. By way of example, it states in relation to Article 59 of the Fourth Geneva Convention that the occupying power has no obligation to consent to or facilitate relief schemes conducted by organizations which are not impartial or whose objectives are not exclusively humanitarian. This is not how Article 59 operates, as Pakistan explained in its written statement. But the point for now is that even pursuant to its own wrong and self-serving understanding of international humanitarian law, Israel nevertheless accepts that it does have obligations to third parties to facilitate relief schemes, provided that those third parties are, in Israel's eyes, impartial. Once more, Israel's attempt to rewrite international law is revealed to be in service of its program to dismantle UNRWA, which it claims to lack such impartiality, but which claim the vast majority of states in any case reject. And in all circumstances, it is not and cannot be for Israel unilaterally to make such determination. Mr. President, members of the court, I conclude. Since 1945, the UN and its organs have reshaped international society. The world today is better off due to the collective action that the UN enables. UNRWA is one manifestation of that collective action. For over 70 years, the agency has tended the flame of the Palestinian people through peaceful and humanitarian assistance, and in so doing, ensured that flame has not gone out. At present, it is being tested, possibly to destruction. But if it is destroyed, the Palestinian people will be the worse for it, as indeed will be all. Israel now sees an opportunity to rid itself of UNRWA. As Pakistan has explained, both in its written statement and in my presentation to you, it seeks to do so in violation of its obligations under the Charter, the General Convention, and international humanitarian law, as well as the law of human rights. Pakistan asks this court to demonstrate the same courage and conviction that it showed in its war and occupied Palestinian territory advisory opinions, and hold Israel to account. UNRWA must be permitted to continue to carry out its life-saving work. Millions of Palestinian lives depend on it. On behalf of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, I thank you for your kind attention.